Late yesterday, I decided I was going to change the topic of our sermon today. So those of you who got the ad, we're not going to be talking about big faith. Sorry, Cindy. Instead, we're going to talk about something, and for whatever reason, God placed this on my heart, and it's something that we all experience, we all wrestle with the tension, we encounter it every day, but often when we approach it or talk about it, there's those awkward, clunky conversations. And so turn to the person next to you and tell them, are you ready to get uncomfortable this morning? Because today we're going to be talking about appetites. Most people, when you talk about appetites, they think food, right? That's one common one that we all experience. And growing up as kids, that was one that was really evident in our home. My parents got a phone call from the preschool, the kindy, saying, and now my dad's the doctor in town. Just to give some context, we're 4 brothers in the family. My older brothers are triplets, and we all had really good appetites. And the kindy gave my parents a call and said, just calling, just want to check, are you feeding your kids enough at home? My mom's like, yeah, of course we are. Why? Because they're eating all the other kids' leftovers. We very rarely got an invite to a party, but when we did, my mom was so scared that we'd devour all the food there within the first 5 minutes. She'd feed us 2 lunches before we went to the party. And still, even though we were full, we'd stuff our pockets and everything full of the sweets and lollies. Appetite. We had healthy appetites as kids. But more specifically, what I want to talk about today and what we're going to be looking at is the tension caused by appetites in our lives. And this tension exists because appetites only know one thing, and that is more. Appetites always want more. And because appetites always want more, it creates this tension. And we label this tension in Christian circles, those of you who maybe aren't too familiar, but we label this tension in Christian circles as temptation. When our appetites are asking, desiring for more, that is what we then call and experience as temptation. How many of you have ever encountered this tension in your life? Okay. Just in case you're not sure what this looks like or what this means, have a look at this next video that might explain it.
Okay, so that's your... Alright, here's the deal. Marshmallow for you. You can either wait, and I'll give you another one if you wait, or you can eat it now. When I come back, I'll give you another one, so then you'll have time. But stay in here and stay in the chair till I come back, okay? All right. I'm gonna go do something, and then I'll come back.
It smells yummy. It smells really good.
It's up to you. You can have it now or you can wait. Okay? I'll be back. Stay in the chair, okay? Okay. Alright, so I'm going to leave and then I'll come back, okay? So you can either eat it right now or you can wait. Either way, okay? Okay. How'd you do? You do good? You did? You wanted to eat it, didn't you? Yeah. So they'll tell you to give you another. Okay, now you want both.
So often when we hear the word appetites, we think food, and that was another food example, but appetites aren't just food. We as human beings, we have a whole range of different appetites. We often hunger for progress. I heard Glenn say something in his prayer. Progress, fun, meaning, success, love, acceptance, power, fame, safety, intimacy, things or material security, victory, and the list goes on. These appetites are part of our human experience, and you know what? They're not going away. So my message today is not forsake and get rid of all your appetites. My message today is rather, how do we learn to manage? How do we learn to navigate this tension that appetites creates in our lives, this constant demand for more, so that appetites don't control us and don't enslave us, but rather we learn to manage that tension in a healthy instead of an unhealthy way. Now this is harder said than done, but before I go on, I might ask, can we turn the foldbacks off?
The monitors.
Monitors, there we go. Sweet. My voice is really loud. This is much harder, well, it's easier said than done, and here's why. God created our appetites, but sin distorted them. Appetites are there, God gave them to us because they lead us towards or give us an idea of things that are healthy and necessary for our life, things that are vital for our survival, for our enjoyment. But the reality of the sinful world we live in is that sin distorted that. And so now, instead of just experiencing or satisfying appetites in a healthy way, often we're led or enticed to satisfy them in an unhealthy way. Appetites are never fully and finally satisfied. Have you ever met that person who they just had this appetite for something and they were like, if I can just get this, my life will be awesome. If I can just experience that, then I know I would have lived and life would have been worth living. And when they get it, are they ever satisfied? When they experience what they wanted to experience, do they stop searching or yearning? Appetites are never fully and finally satisfied. And then your appetites always whisper now, never later. Ladies, this is why when you're trying on that pair of shoes, you never hear your appetite saying, wait till next year. You already have 20 pence in the cupboard. Appetites always say, now, not later. Gents, that's why when the latest iPhone comes out, you're always like, even though the one you had, the iPhone 8S is perfect, it's still functioning well, it can do everything you need it to do, but somehow you need to buy the iPhone X. And I can't use any Samsung analogies because that would just be wrong. Thank you. So a story in the Bible that illustrates this tension, where I want us to go and sort of camp out today, is in the book of Genesis, Genesis chapter 25. And we'll be picking the story up in verse 29 to 34. This is a story some of you might be familiar with, some of you not, but I remember hearing this story growing up as a child and wondering, how could one of the characters in the story, named Esau, how could he do what he did? How could Esau do what he did? Well, just to give us a bit of context, at the heart of this story is something called a birthright. Now, a birthright, we don't really know what that is in our Western context. We don't use that or exercise that in our cultures. But a birthright in ancient Near East culture was something really significant. And here's what it meant. As the firstborn male child, your birthright was that when you were older, when your father was about to pass away, he would confer to you, first of all, position. You would now be the head of the family. You would be the judge of the family, which meant that all your siblings, your mother even, everyone connected to the household would have to come under your leadership and under your headship. Position. That was the first thing that birthright enabled you to. The next thing was possessions or privilege. You received a double portion of all your father's belongings. You were set up for life if you were the firstborn and received that birthright from your father. It seems a bit, now in our day and age, we're like, that's a bit unfair, especially if you're a younger child like me. It's like, really? But this was the culture that they lived in. And then, the other thing that most commentators recognize came along with that, and certainly in this story it was promise. The promise, and in this story it was the promise that God had given to Abraham when he said, I will make you a great nation. Your people will be mighty among the earth. Whoever blesses you will be blessed. Whoever curses you will be cursed. This blessing was passed on, and this promise was passed on to the firstborn child from Abraham all the way down. And so this is what the birthright meant and entitled you to: position, privilege, and promise. And it is at the heart of the story. So we're going to pick it up in Genesis chapter 25, verse 29. I'll be reading from the NLT Bible, but follow along or on the screen if you don't have a Bible with you. It says, one day Jacob was cooking some stew. Esau arrived home from the wilderness, exhausted and hungry, and Esau said to Jacob, I'm starved. Give me some of that stew. A little bit more context. Here's two brothers. They were actually twins and born to Isaac, and I always mix them up. Is it Rebecca? Isaac and Rebecca. And Esau was born first. But in his mother's womb there was a wrestle, there was a tussle, but Esau came out first, so he was the firstborn son. He was going to receive the birthright. And the Bible also tells us that Jacob was kind of a mummy's boy, in the sense that he stayed around the camp. He was happy to, the Bible also infers that he was a scholar. That's what it meant. He stayed around the tents in the camp. But he also cooked. We see here him making a stew. And he was definitely his mum's favorite. Then we have Esau. And Esau was a manly man. Okay? He went out hunting. He probably grunted in conversations to his father. And they understood what each other meant. And his father, it says, loved eating the wild game that Esau would go and catch. And so the father loved Esau. Esau probably terrified his mum, and she was always worried about him because he was always gone for ages. She didn't know where he was. She couldn't control him. And she was like, no, he drives me crazy. But Jacob, the father, Isaac, was like, yeah, that's my boy. Okay, so that's the tension that is kind of going on here in the story. So in comes Esau. He's been out on a hunt. He smells, as is afar off, he starts getting the wafts of this lentil stew that Jacob is busy cooking, and his appetite starts flaring up. And as he comes into camp, he says to Jacob, please give me some of this lentil stew. Now, something that is also happening in the story And many of you might have seen it, maybe you haven't, but if you have siblings, you've experienced this dynamic that I'm going to refer to. If you are parents and you have kids, maybe you've seen this dynamic as well. And that is that never or almost never does the younger brother, or let me put it this way, almost never does the older brother need anything from the younger brother. Almost always, the older brother doesn't even like having the younger brother around. You're annoying, you're irritating, go away. The younger brother or the younger sibling is always wanting to be part of whatever the older one is doing. But the older one almost never needs anything from the younger one. So when the opportunity arises, when that moment comes, when the older brother, and I can testify to this, when the older brother comes and says, I need something from you. Do you know what us younger siblings do? We go for what is most valuable. We like, okay, can I ride your bike? I'm like, no. Okay, can I wear your jersey? No. Okay, and you start haggling. You go down, you like start at what you think is the most valuable, the thing you covet of theirs the most. And then you work your way down until finally you agree on a trade. But for this one moment, the younger sibling holds the power. And we see this dynamic at play. Verse 31. All right, Jacob replied, but trade me the rights of the firstborn son. Can you imagine how ridiculous this is? He's like, okay, older brother, you're needing something from me, younger brother, that's fine. So here's what I'm going to require. Trade me your rights as the firstborn son, and I will give you this bowl of lentil stew. Every decision, every choice, we're asked to make a trade. How many of you look back in your life and you can identify those bowls of stew? That season, that moment, that summer break, that business trip. When you look back and you go, what was I thinking? Why would I even do that? It makes no sense. Yet they're there. Verse 32, Esau says, look, I'm dying of starvation. What good is my birthright now? And I look at this and I'm like, yep, Esau, I get you hungry. The hunt has probably been long. I know it's hot in Palestine. But you're not about to die. You've walked into camp. If you were really about to die, someone would have found you in the field and carried you. You've walked into camp. But here he makes this bold exclamation. I'm about to die. I'm starving. I need this bowl of stew now. And so we wonder, what is happening? Well, psychologists and neuroscientists have discovered that when one or more of our appetites are heightened or inflamed, there is a rush of adrenaline and a chemical surge in our brains. And a number of things happen. I'm only going to touch on two of them, and I imagine this is probably what was happening to Esau, and you've experienced this in your life as well. One of them is impact bias. Impact bias, which says, this bowl of stew is going to be the best bowl of stew ever. If I can just have that donut, man, it's going to be good. And then what happens when you eat that donut? Wasn't that good, was it? Oh, yeah. We all have experienced that, and here is something that happens when our appetites get inflamed. Our brains try and tell us, you know what, you want to satisfy that, you want to indulge that, and so it says it's going to be so good, it's going to be, and creates this whole idea, this euphoric sense that it's going to be so much better than it actually is. The other thing that happens is focalism. We suddenly, guys, you remember that time in high school? There was that girl, she sat in the left-hand corner. You knew who her friends were. You knew what subject she took. She didn't know you existed. She still doesn't know you existed. But all you could think about was that girl. We all know those moments when we just can't get this thing out of our head that our brain just focuses on and fixates on, and then no matter what you do, it just seems to be there. Because appetite is flaring up and it's impacting your sense of judgment. You can't shake it, you can't get it out of your mind. And so here Esau comes to his brother and says, man, I need this, I'm starving. No, you're not. You walked into camp. But he's probably experiencing this impact bias and focalism. I need this bowl of stew, verse 33. But Jacob said, first, you must swear that your birthright is mine. So Esau swore an oath, thereby selling all his rights as the firstborn brother to Jacob. Driven by appetite and impulse, Esau makes a trade. Here's what I wish I could do. I wish I could go back in time, jump into a time machine, go back to this moment and go, Esau, wait! Esau, just, before you do this, before you make this trade, think about this, just consider this. A few years from now, you're going to be the father of a great nation. And this nation, a number of years from now, one of their leaders is going to have a personal encounter with God. And when he encounters God, he's going to say to God, God, who are you? And God is going to say, I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Esau. And you know what, Esau? This God is the creator God, the covenant God, the God of all the universe, and he uses you in trying to describe who he is. And that's not even the best bit, because 2,000 years from now, Esau, picture this, the Christ, the Messiah, the one that has been promised through all eternity, is going to be born in a little manger. And when he's born, when the writer of his story, Matthew, talks about his heritage, his lineage, he's going to say, in his lineage was Abraham, Isaac, and Esau. Before you make this trade, Esau, think about what's at stake. Understand and know what it is you're trading. But if you do make this trade, forever the story will read, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and your little brother Jacob. But you know what? I can't go there. And most probably when you're experiencing your appetite flaring up and there's this bowl of stew in front of you, you're not going to have someone to go, wait! Think about it before you do this. And so here's what I want you to do. And here's what I wish Esau had done. Pause, reframe, and refrain. If you forget anything from today, remember this. Pause. Okay, let's do actions. Pause, reframe, and refrain. When we're tempted, when you're experiencing this impulse and appetite flaring up, you recognize focalism and impact biases impacting your judgment. I want you to pause, take a breath, and ask this question. What am I being asked to trade? What am I being asked to trade? And then assessing the situation, reframe. Because there's always more at stake than what you think. And if you're young, maybe it's your future that's at stake. If you're old, maybe it's your legacy that's at stake. When you're in the middle, maybe it's both future and legacy that are at stake. But what is on the line? You know, most often, what is on the line is what is on the board. Something in your future, something in your family, something in your legacy, and it always impacts your faith. So reframe. What is actually at stake? If I indulge, if I give in to this appetite, if I partake in this bowl of stew, what is actually at stake? Andy Stanley, where I got some of these concepts from, he makes this statement. In the moment of decision, one discovers who they are and whose they are. In the moment of decision, when you experience a temptation, one discovers who they are and whose they are. Then refrain. When you're faced with temptation this week, here's what I want you to do. Lean into God. And I've taken some of these ideas from Matthew chapter 4, when Jesus experienced his temptation, some of his responses to that. If you have not read that story, that's your homework this afternoon. Matthew chapter 4, Jesus' temptation in the wilderness. See how he dealt with, how he paused, reframed, and refrained from the temptation that was in front of him. But here's what I want you to do. Press into God and say this prayer. Lord, help me. Lord, help me refrain. Lord, help me say no. And then speak this statement. Temptation, you're not going to steal my future. You're not going to steal my family. You're not going to steal my faith. Lord, help me. Temptation, you're not going to steal my future. You're not going to steal my family. You're not going to steal my faith. See, the issue is never the bowl of stew. It's what you're trading it for. And so my question is, what's your bowl of stew? The saddest part of the story for me is verse 34, where Jacob gave Esau some bread and lentil stew. Esau ate the meal, then got up and left, and he showed contempt for his rights as a firstborn. Because you see, that's inadvertently what happens. What was the promise of our future? What was the blessing that we were to receive? What was the privilege that we had been given? What was a beautiful thing? When we trade it for what is temporary, we then treat that with disdain and contempt. Maybe for you it's your marriage, your children, maybe your job, maybe your heritage, maybe your church. So church family, I don't know your story, and I don't know what you're facing right now. But at some point in the near future, I can guarantee you, your appetite will flare up and demand that it be satisfied in an unhealthy way. And so here's what I want you to do. Crying out to God for strength. Pause, reframe, and refrain. Trade what is temporary for what is eternal. Trade what is momentary for what is lasting. But if you are like Esau, and if you are like me, then there are some moments in your life where you made an unwise trade. And you can look back on it and go, what was I thinking? But here's what I want you to remember in that. Because Jacob and Esau's story is the story of humanity. You see, we are Esau, created and born into position and privilege and promise. But through Adam, we traded our birthright for what Genesis portrays as an indulgence of appetite. but our brother born after us, and as Romans would later declare, Jesus, the second Adam, now the firstborn of God, the realization of the promise, the possessor of the privilege, consecrated to the Father and the spiritual head of our family. He reconciled us and restored us. He reconnected us and conferred us to being co-heirs with Christ, inheritors of the promise, saved by grace and seated with him in the place of honor at the right hand of the Father. I don't know what your bowl of stew is, and I don't care how many bowls of stew you've had or will have. But what I want you to grasp this morning is that no matter what your story, no matter where your journey, God, through Jesus and the power of the Holy Spirit, can and has restored and reconciled you to him.
Amen.
Now I can hear someone say, then Norman, why refrain? Why resist if we know that we are restored and reconciled? Here's why. Because even though Jesus has freed us from the condemnation of our sin, we still walk out the consequence of our sin. And the consequence of our sin leads to pain, despair, hurt, and regret. And so when the appetite flares up, when those moments come, may we pause, reframe, and refrain, and stop trading our future, our family, and our faith for a lousy